Welcome to Revenge with Luna. My name is Stella Vance. I'm 31 years old, and if you've ever been told by the people who were supposed to love you that you were nothing, I want you to know what happens when you decide to believe them just long enough to prove them right. 7 years ago, my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye across the Thanksgiving table and said, with a smile so polished it could cut glass, "My son deserves someone who actually brings something to the table. You, sweetheart, are a charity case he hasn't figured out how to return yet." My husband sat right beside her. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh. A real one, the kind that says he agreed and had been waiting for someone else to say it first. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel and my jaw locked so tight, I thought I'd crack a molar. I didn't cry until I was in the shower with the water hot enough to burn. And even then, I told myself it was fine, that she was difficult, that he didn't mean it, that I was overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I was just too scared to admit what I already knew. 14 months later, he filed for divorce. His mother had found him someone more suitable. Someone from the right neighborhood, the right family, the right tax bracket. I found out through a mutual friend, not from him. He'd apparently been planning it for months. While I was working double shifts at the hospital, pulling 12-hour days as a surgical coordinator, coming home with my feet destroyed and my spirit running on fumes. He was having dinner with lawyers. I left that marriage with my car, my clothes, a box of books, and $11,000 in a savings account his family didn't know existed. $11,000 and zero dignity, or so they thought. Here's what they didn't account for. I am very, very good at being underestimated. The years that followed were not glamorous. I am not going to tell you it was a clean arc, because it wasn't. There were months where I ate rice and eggs 4 nights a week. There was a studio apartment with a window that didn't close all the way and a neighbor who played bass-heavy musics until 2 in the morning. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and thought maybe they were right. Maybe I really was nothing. But then morning would come, and I would go to work. And I kept learning, kept grinding, kept building something so quietly that nobody noticed until it was already too late to dismiss it. I went back to school part-time while working full-time. Finished my healthcare administration degree, got recruited by a regional hospital network, then a larger one. Moved into operations management. Then consulting. I built a firm, small at first, just me and one contractor working for my kitchen table, that specialized in restructuring hospital billing systems, eliminating this kind of administrative waste that costs institutions millions every year. Within 3 years, we had 14 clients. Within 5, we had 41. I bought a house, not a starter home. A house with a chef's kitchen and a back porch that looks out over a creek in a neighborhood, so quiet you can hear birds in the morning. I paid cash. I did not think about my ex-husband's family often. But I also did not forget. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 2 years ago. I was in back-to-back meetings and let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, it was my ex-husband's voice. Thinner somehow, less certain than I remembered. He said he just wanted to talk, that a lot had changed, that he hoped I was well. I sat with the phone in my hand for about 30 seconds. Then I deleted it. 3 weeks later, my sister-in-law, his younger sister who had never been unkind to me personally, but had also never once stood up for me, sent a message through Instagram. She said the family was going through a difficult time. She said she'd always felt bad about how things ended. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I left the message unread. I know how that sounds. I know some people would say I was being cold, being petty, holding on to the past. But here's what I want you to understand. I wasn't holding on to anything. I had actually, genuinely moved on. I had a full life, a business I was proud of, friends who knew my real laugh, a therapist I trusted, a garden I was terrible at but deeply committed to. I was not sitting somewhere nursing a wound. I was living. What I was not willing to do was pretend that the past hadn't happened, simply because it was now inconvenient for them. The situation clarified itself quickly. Within a month, I understood the shape of things. My ex-husband's new marriage, the suitable one, the right family one, had collapsed after 2 years. There were apparently significant financial revelations involved. His mother's business, a real estate development company she'd run for decades with her husband, was being investigated for a series of zoning violations and fraudulent permitting. The legal fees alone were reportedly staggering. Several properties were frozen. Her husband, my ex-husband's father, had quietly separated from her 6 months earlier and moved to a condo in Florida that I heard about from someone who knew someone. The family who told me I had nothing to offer was now systematically losing everything they'd built. I did not celebrate this. I want to be clear about that. I am not someone who lights candles and says a little prayer when other people suffer. Life is hard for most people, most of the time, and I have no interest in anyone's collapse for its own sake. But I also wasn't going to pretend they hadn't earned it. The first time they showed up at my house, I was in the back garden, which I had recently improved somewhat, with the help of YouTube and genuine stubbornness. When I heard the front gate buzzer, I looked at the intercom camera on my phone and felt something strange settle in my chest. My mother-in-law, standing at my front gate in a coat I'd seen in a magazine. Still immaculate. Still perfectly composed, except for something around her eyes that wasn't quite right. My ex-husband stood slightly behind and to her left, which told me everything I needed to know about who was running this particular errand. I sat down. I washed my hands at the outdoor sink. I took my time. Then I pressed the intercom button. Yes? There was a pause. She hadn't expected me to sound like that. Calm, level, like a person who had nowhere urgent to be and nothing to prove. It's Vivian, she said, and it took me a full second to place the name, which I think was its own kind of answer. I was hoping we might speak. About what? Another pause. Longer this time. There are some things I'd like to say to you. In person. I think we both know that certain things were handled poorly, years ago. I'd like the opportunity to address that. I looked at the camera feed. Her posture was almost perfect. Almost. I appreciate you reaching out, I said. I'm not available today. Have a good afternoon. I clicked off the intercom. I heard her ring again twice. I did not respond. I went back to my garden, put my earbuds in, and finished what I was doing. 40 minutes later, when I checked the camera, the driveway was empty. I poured myself a glass of lemonade and sat on the back porch and listened to the creek. I thought about the woman who'd left that Thanksgiving dinner, feeling like a charity case who couldn't be returned fast enough. I thought about her a lot, actually. The way you sometimes think about someone you used to know, with sadness more than anger. With a kind of tenderness for how much she didn't yet understand about herself. She would have let them in and made tea and sat there quietly shrinking while they explained how difficult things were. I am not her anymore. They came back 5 days later. This time it was just my ex-husband, alone, without his mother, which I suspected was a strategic choice. He rang the buzzer at 11 in the morning on a Saturday and held his hand up toward the camera in a gesture that was probably meant to look humble. I watched him for a moment from the intercom screen while I stood in my kitchen in my robe, with coffee in my hand. I pressed the button. What do you need, Stella? He exhaled. I want to talk to you. Please, 5 minutes, about everything. About what happened. I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything. I know that. Things are really bad right now. My mom's legal situation is serious. I don't have the money to help her. I've been staying at a friend's place. You thought maybe what? Silence. You thought maybe I would help you, I said. Not a question. I don't know what I thought. His voice had a quality I'd never heard in it before. Something stripped down. I just didn't know who else to call. I stood there for a moment. The coffee was warm in my hand. The morning light was coming through the kitchen windows in that particular way it does. In October, golden and slightly slanted, the kind of light that makes everything look both beautiful and temporary. You called the wrong person, I said, gently. Take care of yourself. I clicked off. Here's the thing about quiet revenge. It doesn't actually feel like revenge in the moment. It feels like self-preservation. It feels like choosing yourself over and over again, Each time the old pull toward appeasement shows up and tries to convince you that your peace is less important than their comfort, you have to make the choice again and again and again. It doesn't get easier, exactly, but it gets cleaner. The internal noise goes quieter each time. What came next, I hadn't planned. But I'd been ready for it for a long time without knowing it. 3 months after their visits, I received a formal inquiry from the legal team representing the hospital network that had acquired two of my ex-mother-in-law's frozen properties in a settlement arrangement. They were looking for a consulting firm to help restructure the administrative operations of a medical office building that had been part of the acquisition. A building that happened to be located 6 blocks from the original real estate office my ex-mother-in-law's company had operated for 30 years. I submitted the proposal. My firm won the contract. On the first day, I walked into that building as the lead consultant on the restructuring project. I stopped in the lobby for a moment. Marble floors, high ceilings, the kind of architecture designed to communicate permanence and authority. There was a large framed photograph on the wall from the building's original dedication, 22 years ago. My ex-mother-in-law was in it, front and center, smiling like someone who had never once considered the possibility that anything could be taken away. I looked at that photograph for a long moment. Then I went upstairs to do my job. I don't need to tell you that I did it well. You already know that. Word travels in certain circles. It traveled. By the time we were 3 weeks into the project, people who had once dismissed my ex-mother-in-law's assessment of me, or worse, agreed with it, were now sending professional connection requests, attending the briefings I led in that conference room, deferring to my expertise in rooms where, 7 years ago, I would not have been permitted to sit at the table. She heard about it. I know she did, because my ex-husband's sister sent another message, more direct this time, less conciliatory. It said, essentially, that my working on that project was cruel, that I was twisting the knife, that I knew what that building meant to their family, and I was doing it on purpose. I read that message twice. I was hired to do a job. I'm doing it professionally and with integrity. I'm sorry the timing is hard. I genuinely wish your family well. I meant it. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't been through something like this. The revenge isn't about wanting them to suffer. It's about reaching a place so solid inside yourself that their suffering or their success no longer determines anything about you. The fact that I was now thriving professionally in a space that had once been central to their identity was not something I engineered. It was something that happened because I had spent 7 years building something real. The irony was not lost on me. But it wasn't something I'd manufactured for maximum pain. Life just sometimes closes a circle. The last time I saw my ex-mother-in-law was at an industry reception. A healthcare and real estate crossover event, one of those evenings where people wear good shoes and stand with wine glasses and talk about projects. I was there representing my firm. She was there, I found out later, because someone had brought her as a guest, a final remnant of the professional world she'd once moved through effortlessly. I saw her across the room before she saw me. She looked older. Not diminished, exactly. She still carried herself with that particular quality of a woman who has always known she was the most important person in any given room. But there was something behind the eyes, something that had seen a few rooms recently where that wasn't true. She saw me. We looked at each other across about 30 feet of polished concrete and ambient lighting and the murmur of professional conversations. I nodded. A single, small nod. Composed. Neutral. The kind of nod you give someone you recognize but have nothing in particular to say to. Then I turned back to the conversation I was in the middle of, smiled at the person I'd been speaking with, and continued my sentence from exactly where I'd left off. I did not look back. I heard later from someone who'd been standing near her that she left the event about 20 minutes after that. I don't know if that's true. I was talking to a potential client and not paying attention to the exits. On the drive home that night, I took the long way, past the old neighborhood where I'd lived during the marriage, with its wide driveways and its decorative mailboxes and its absolute certainty about who belonged and who didn't. I drove slowly through it once, windows down, the October air cold and sharp and clear. Then I drove home. My house was quiet, the porch light was on. The creek made its sound in the dark. I've thought a lot about what I'd want to say to someone going through the early part of what I went through. The part where you're still in it, still being told by people who should know better that you are less than. The part where you're eating rice and eggs 4 nights a week and wondering if they might actually be right about you. I'd say, they're not right about you, but more importantly, whether they are or aren't is genuinely none of your business right now. Your business is the next thing in front of you. Just the next thing. That's it. I didn't build what I built for them. I didn't rebuild myself to prove something to anyone. I did it because the alternative was to let the story they told about me become the story I told about myself, and I refused. That refusal, quiet, unglamorous, relentless, was the whole thing. That was the revenge, if you want to call it that. Not the building, not the contract, not the nod across the room, the refusal. On my back porch, that October night, I sat with a glass of wine and listened to the creek and felt something I don't have a perfect word for. Bigger than peace, sweeter than victory. The feeling of a chapter ending not with a bang but with a deep, settling exhale. The kind your body makes when it finally believes it's safe. They called me a charity case, who couldn't be returned fast enough. I am the one who built something they couldn't touch. And the most honest revenge of all is that I almost never think about them anymore. Almost.